When Emily walked away, the day Jake's heart broke, but his future began. It was a chilly November afternoon, the kind where the sky turns gray a little too early and everything feels heavier than it should. Jake Carter stood outside a small coffee shop in a corner of their college town, clutching a wrinkled resume and a last sip of lukewarm coffee. He had just come from yet another failed job interview, his third that week. His bank account was gasping its final breath, and hope felt like something only other people had. Inside the shop sat Emily, his girlfriend of nearly 4 years, the girl he thought he'd marry. She looked beautiful as always, polished in her blazer and heels, her phone buzzing with job offers from top companies in the city. She was going places. Jake wasn't. He took a deep breath and walked in, smiling despite the storm swirling inside his chest. "Hey," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. Emily glanced up from her phone, offering a half-smile. "Hey, how'd the interview go?" Jake didn't answer right away. He looked down, fidgeting with his hands. "They said I wasn't the right fit." Again. Silence. Emily sighed, not the comforting kind, but the heavy, disappointed kind that hits you harder than any harsh word. She leaned back, folded her arms, and looked Jake dead in the eyes. "Jake, how long are we going to do this? You chasing dreams, and me watching them crash one by one." Jake felt like the ground disappeared beneath him. "I'm not giving up, I'm just not there yet. But I will be. I promise." Emily shook her head slowly. "I've been patient. I've supported you through everything. But I'm 24, Jake. I have offers from firms in New York and Chicago. I want a real life, stability. Not this." Jake's voice trembled. "So what are you saying?" She paused, avoiding his gaze now. "I'm saying I can't keep doing this. I need someone who can take care of me now, not someday. I'm tired of living on promises and potential." Those words cut deeper than she knew. Jake felt the sting in his chest, in his stomach, in his soul. He tried to find something, anything, to say that would make her stay, but the look in her eyes had already said goodbye. "So that's it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're walking away?" Just like that. Emily nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Jake, but you're just a dreamer, and I can't live on dreams." She stood up, adjusted her coat, and without another word, walked out the door. No hug, no tears, just the soft jingle of the door chime as it closed behind her. Jake sat there for what felt like hours. The world moved around him. Cups clinking, people chatting, a baby cry in the corner. But he didn't hear any of it. His world had stopped. Everything he'd been building, everything he believed in, suddenly felt like a lie. He stepped outside eventually, the cold air biting at his face. He walked past the bookstore where they had their first date, past the bench where she told him she loved him, past the street where they talked about building a future together. Now it was all just noise, memories wrapped in pain. That night, Jake didn't go home. He sat in his car in the parking lot of a grocery store, staring at the ceiling, asking the universe why. Why did it all fall apart? Why wasn't love enough? Why did she leave when he needed her most? But somewhere between that heartbreak and the silence of night, something inside him changed. He realized he had two choices. Let the pain consume him or let it fuel him. He chose the second. From that moment on, Jake made a silent vow. He would never beg anyone to believe in him again. If the world didn't see his worth, he'd build something so undeniable they wouldn't be able to ignore it. He didn't know how yet. He didn't know when. But he knew why, and that was enough to start. That's how Jake Carter's journey began. Not with success. Not with applause. Not with luck. But with loss. The loss of love. The loss of certainty and the loss of comfort. All of which became the spark that lit the fire inside him. He would carry her words for years. "You're just a dreamer." And someday he would smile at them, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because the day Emily walked away was the day Jake Carter finally walked toward his destiny. From rock bottom to relentless, Jake Carter's rise begins. The day Emily walked out his life, Jake Carter hit rock bottom. Not the kind of dramatic Hollywood crash with thunder and rain. No, it was quieter than that. More painful because it was real. He didn't have a dramatic breakdown or scream into the sky. He just sat in silence, staring at the ceiling of his beat-up Honda Civic, parked outside a closed gas station, wondering how the hell he'd gotten here. He had $48 in his checking account. No job, no girlfriend, no one who believed in him, not even himself. But that night, something shifted. The pain didn't go away. It sat with him like a shadow in the back seat. But he decided that if no one else would bet on him, he'd bet on himself. Not because he was sure he'd win, but because he refused to lose like this. The hustle begins. The next morning, Jake started applying to every job he could find. He didn't care if it was beneath him. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Within days, he landed 2 part-time gigs. One as a line cook at a 24-hour diner, and another delivering groceries at night. He was exhausted. Always, his eyes burned from lack of sleep. His body ached. But there was a strange peace in the grind. He wasn't waiting around anymore. He was moving. Every dollar earned wasn't just survival. It was a brick in the foundation of the life he was determined to build. Between shifts, he'd sit in the back of the diner on his break, watching YouTube tutorials on coding, marketing, and financial literacy. He downloaded free ebooks, listened to podcasts while delivering orders, scribbled ideas into a battered notebook. He was teaching himself, not because someone told him to, but because he had to. The first failure and the hard lesson. 6 months in, Jake thought he was ready to try something big. He scraped together $1,500, every penny he had, and invested in an online dropshipping business he found through a flashy course promising overnight success. Spoiler, it failed. Hard. The website didn't convert. The ads didn't perform. 2 weeks later, his money was gone, and his inbox was full of refund requests. Jake was crushed. It felt like a confirmation of everything Emily had said. "You're just a dreamer." But instead of quitting, he wrote in his notebook, "Dreams don't fail. People quit too early." He analyzed every mistake, learned about targeting, branding, copywriting. He didn't see it as a loss anymore, just tuition for his real-world education. The breakthrough idea. One night, while delivering groceries to a warehouse district at 2 a.m., Jake met a man named Luis, a warehouse worker who just got laid off and had no idea how to find a new job. That conversation stuck with Jake. Later that week, he had dinner with an Uber driver who was juggling 3 gig apps just to pay rent. A thought hit him like a lightning bolt. What if I built something to help people like them? People like me? That's when the idea for Workbridge was born, a mobile platform that connected blue-collar workers with immediate job opportunities, filtered by skill, location, and urgency. Jake knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no funding, no team, just a dream and a fire in his chest that wouldn't go out. He used every break, every spare moment, to build a prototype. He partnered with a junior developer he met on Reddit. Together, they created the first bare-bones version of Workbridge. It was clunky, slow, and ugly, but it worked. Jake launched it quietly through online forums and local job boards. Within 6 months, over 3,000 users had signed up, living like a ghost, building like a giant. For nearly 3 years, Jake disappeared from the social world. He didn't go to parties, didn't date, didn't post updates about his life. To most people, it looked like he'd vanished, but in truth, he was in the lab, building. He lived off cheap noodles, slept 4 hours a night, and reinvested every cent back into the business. When Workbridge landed its first investor, a $50,000 seed from a former tech CEO who loved Jake's grit, he cried in the parking lot for an hour straight, not because of the money, but because, for the first time, someone saw what he saw. The turning point. By year 5, Workbridge wasn't just a startup, it was a movement. It connected over 100,000 workers with short-term and full-time jobs. It had partnerships with local governments and trade schools. Jake Carter was no longer just a dreamer. He was a builder, a disruptor, a CEO. But here's what's crazy. Even as the business grew, Jake kept his old Civic. He still answered customer emails at 2 a.m. He still remembered the taste of gas station coffee and the ache of heartbreak. He didn't build this to show off. He built it because he had to. He once told a young intern, I didn't start with genius. I started with pain, and I turned it into purpose. Jake Carter didn't become a success overnight. He became one every single day he showed up, tired, broke, alone, and refused to stop. The return. When Jake came back in silence, said everything. It had been 10 years. 10 long, gritty, painful, beautiful years since Jake Carter sat alone in that coffee shop, watching Emily walk out the door without looking back. 10 years since he had anything close to comfort. And now he was coming home, but not as the boy she left behind. The small town of Fairview hadn't changed much. The same red brick buildings. The same cracked sidewalks and sleepy traffic lights. But when Jake pulled up in his black Tesla, quiet, smooth, almost too sleek for a place like this, heads turned. He wasn't back for attention. He was back because his mother's house needed repairs, because his hometown had helped shape him, and now he had the power to give something back. But life has a funny way of weaving closure into the most unexpected places. A familiar face in an unexpected place. Jake was standing in line at the local hardware store, picking up paint and supplies, when he heard a voice behind him, one he hadn't heard in a decade, but could still recognize instantly. Jake! He turned slowly, and there she was, Emily. Time had touched her gently. She still had the same warm hazel eyes, the same effortless poise. But something was different. The spark, the confident glint she always carried, was dimmer now. Worn down, maybe? Softer. Jake gave a polite smile. Emily! Hey! She blinked, clearly stunned. Wow! I almost didn't recognize you. I get that a lot, he said casually, not out of arrogance, just truth. They stood there for a moment, the air between them thick, with everything unspoken. The last time they saw each other, he was broken, and barely surviving. Now he was something else entirely. How have you been? She asked, her voice almost cautious. Jake shrugged lightly. Busy. Work's kept me all over the place. I just got back in town for a little while. Emily nodded, biting her lip. I saw your name on Forbes a few years ago. Something about an app? He smiled gently. Workbridge. Yeah, it's been a journey. Emily looked down. I remember when you used to scribble ideas into that old notebook. I never thought. Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. Her sentence already said enough. A coffee and the ghost of the past. She invited him for coffee. Part nostalgia, part curiosity, maybe part guilt. Jake agreed. They sat at the same cafe where she once broke his heart. Same table, even, but this time the roles were reversed. She looked nervous now, unsure. And Jake, he was calm, composed. A man who had nothing to prove, but everything in control. I think about that day a lot, she finally said. The day I left. Jake stirred his coffee. Do you regret it? She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I do. Silence. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said, choosing security. I thought you were stuck. But you weren't. You were just building. I didn't see it. Jake looked at her, his gaze steady. I don't blame you, Emily. You wanted something I couldn't give you back then. And honestly, if you hadn't left, I don't know if I'd be the man I am now. Her eyes welled up just slightly. I didn't think you'd forgive me. He gave a small smile. I didn't forgive you for a long time, but I forgave myself. That's when everything changed. The man she could have had. They talked for an hour. She told him about her life, how she moved to Chicago, took corporate job, married a guy who checked all the boxes. They divorced 3 years later. No kids, just a quiet apartment, and long hours at the office. Jake listened. He didn't gloat, didn't judge. He just listened, and when she asked, "Are you see anyone?" he simply said, "Not really. I've been too focused on building things." The truth is, Jake wasn't lonely. His life was full. Not perfect, but purposeful. He had employees who depended on him, foundations he supported, students he mentored. He had built a life far bigger than a romantic storyline. But sitting across from Emily, watching her eyes search for a second chance, He felt something unexpected. Not desire, not resentment, but peace. Walking away, this time on his terms. As they stood to leave, Emily touched his arm gently. "Jake, I know this is crazy, but would you maybe want to catch up again sometime? Dinner or something?" Jake looked at her, not with bitterness, but clarity. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said kindly. "We're in different places now, and I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." She nodded, forcing a smile. But he saw it in her eyes, the regret, the what if, the ache of realizing she left a man who didn't just make it, but thrived. And as he walked away, this time it was Emily who stayed frozen at the table, heart heavy, eyes full. Jake stepped outside, the cool wind brushing his face. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that watched him fall apart 10 years ago, and whispered to himself, "Some things break us just so we can rebuild stronger." He didn't come back for revenge. He came back to see if he'd healed. And he had. More than success, Jake Carter's legacy begins. Jake Carter never wanted to be famous. He didn't crave the spotlight, never dreamed of red carpets or magazine features. What he wanted, what truly drove him, was to matter, to build something bigger than himself. Something that would outlive his bank account, his company, even his name. And after a decade of hustle, heartbreak, and hard-earned victories, he finally understood success isn't measured by how high you climb. It's measured by how many people you lift along the way. Full circle, WorkBridge had exploded. With over 1 million users and partnerships across 6 countries, Jake's app was changing lives. Every day, someone landed a job because of what he built. But the moment that shifted everything for Jake came during a routine conference in Atlanta. He was stepping off stage, wrapping up a keynote about building from the ground up, when a nervous college student approached him. The kid was wearing a second-hand suit, shoes 2 sizes too big, and carrying a beat-up backpack. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice shaking, "I just want to say thank you. My mom raised 3 of us alone. She lost her job during the pandemic, but because of WorkBridge, she found part-time work within a week. That job helped her keep our house. So, thank you for giving us a second chance." Jake didn't know what to say at first. He just nodded and put a hand on the young man's shoulder. But something clicked in his heart at that moment. This was the reason he kept going through the nights he wanted to give up, from tech CEO to mentor. Jake started changing how he spent his time. Yes, he still led the company, still attended board meetings, and oversaw product development. But more and more, his calendar filled up with something new, mentorship. He launched a free online series called From the Bottom, where he taught practical business lessons, everything from budgeting and branding to dealing with failure. No fluff, no overproduced content, just real, raw advice from someone who'd lived it. He also began visiting high schools in underserved neighborhoods, the ones most people ignored. He didn't wear suits or bring slideshows. He just showed up with his story. "You don't need rich parents," he told the students. "You don't need to be a genius. You just need to start and not stop." He talked about eating dollar store noodles, getting laughed at, losing money, sleeping in a car. The kids listened, not because he was successful, but because he was real. Emily sees his legacy. Word of Jake's outreach spread fast, even reaching Fairview. One afternoon, Jake returned to his old high school to speak at Career Day. It was surreal. 10 years ago, he was a quiet kid in the back of the classroom, drawing business ideas in the margins of his notebook, while teachers warned him to focus on real goals. Now, he was shaking hands with the principal and walking into an auditorium full of teenagers who couldn't believe someone from their town was in Forbes. Among the crowd, sitting near the back, was Emily. She didn't say anything that day, just watched as Jake spoke with purpose and confidence, inspiring every kid in the room. As they clapped and lined up for selfies, she quietly slipped out. She later wrote him an email that simply read, "What you've done, it's more than success. It's legacy. I'm proud of you, Jake." He replied only with, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well." No bitterness, no pride, just peace. Giving back one life at a time. Jake created the Bridge Fund, a nonprofit offering micro grants and mentorship to young entrepreneurs from low-income communities. But this wasn't charity. It was investment. In dreams. In hustle. In belief. One of his first ments, a 19-year-old girl from Detroit named Aaliyah, wanted to launch a mobile detailing service. Jake funded her startup costs, but more importantly, coached her weekly. Within a year, her company had 3 vans and 8 employees. She became her neighborhood's first young female business owner. When a reporter asked Jake why he spends so much time on one-on-one mentorship, he smiled and said, "Because someone out there is sitting in their car right now, broke and broken like I was. If I can help them stand up, then I'm doing what I was put here to do." Redefining the American dream. People began to associate Jake Carter not just with success, but with hope. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a tech bro riding private jets and posting motivational quotes from a yacht. He still drove himself to meetings, still answered emails, still remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. His story wasn't about rags to riches. It was about resilience, about building, falling, and building again. He told one graduating class, "The American dream isn't about becoming rich. It's about becoming free. Free from fear. Free from limits. Free from the idea that your past defines your future." And people listened because he lived it. The real legacy. Years later, a mural was painted on the side of the community center Jake funded in Fairview. It showed a young man sitting in an old Civic, staring up at the stars, holding a notebook. Below it, the words, "You're not stuck. You're just not done yet." Jake Carter smiled when he saw it for the first time, not because it had his face, but because it captured his message perfectly. He never wanted to be remembered as the guy who made millions. He wanted to be remembered as the guy who helped others believe they could too. The right kind of love, Jake Carter's final chapter. Jake Carter had it all, at least on paper. His name was known in the business world. His company, Workbridge, had changed thousands of lives. His story had inspired a generation. But if you asked Jake what was missing, he wouldn't answer right away. Not because he didn't know, but because it was the one part of his life he'd been too careful with. He had learned the hard way that love could break a man, could make him feel like all his ambition wasn't enough. Years ago, when Emily walked out of his life because he had no future, Jake buried that wound deep and focused on building his empire. But the truth? No amount of success could quiet the quiet. The woman at the bookstore. It was a rainy afternoon in Seattle. Jake had just finished a long meeting and ducked into a local bookstore to escape the downpour. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a quiet moment, a break from the noise. That's when he saw her. She was standing in the poetry section, hair tied in a messy bun, wearing jeans and a paint-splattered sweatshirt. She had an armful of books and was humming softly to herself. Jake didn't know why she caught his attention. Maybe it was how peaceful she looked. Or maybe it was the fact that she didn't glance his way once, even though most people in the room usually did. She didn't know who he was. And that, somehow, was refreshing. He found himself picking up a book nearby, The Alchemist, ironically, and stood close enough to catch her humming a few lines from an old 90s song. "You have good taste in music," he said, half smiling. She looked up, startled but not annoyed. "Only the classics," she replied. They talked for 5 minutes, then 10, then half an hour. Her name was Lena. She was an art teacher. Didn't care about startups or tech trends. She spent her days painting with kids and her nights reading poetry and baking bread. And when she finally asked him what he did for a living, Jake just said, "I help people find jobs." That was enough for her. A slow kind of falling. Unlike everything Jake built in life, this wasn't rushed. They started meeting for coffee on Sundays, walks in the park, late-night phone calls about everything and nothing. Lena didn't care about headlines. She cared about presence, about honesty, about the kind of things money couldn't buy. Jake never had to prove himself, never had to be the man who made it. He just had to show up. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to. He told her things he hadn't told anyone. About his nights sleeping in his car. About Emily. about the moment he realized that chasing success had become a form of running. Lena listened, never judged, just held his story gently. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she said one night, her voice soft. "You're allowed to be human." And those words hit Jake harder than any investor pitch or motivational quote ever had. When the past comes knocking. One day, while walking with Lena near Pike Place Market, they bumped into an old business contact of Jake's, a high-profile VC who knew Jake from his early pitch days. "Jake Carter, still shaking up the world," the man laughed. Then, turning to Lena, "You must be the lucky woman. You know, this guy's the reason half the Valley's portfolio even exists." Lena smiled politely. Jake chuckled, said something modest, and they moved on. But afterward, Jake looked at Lena nervously. Sorry if that was weird. She looked at him with a smile that disarmed every wall he'd ever built. "Jake," she said, "I'm proud of you, but I liked you before I knew any of that. You don't have to impress me. You already matter." In that moment, Jake realized he was finally loved for who he was, not what he had. Full circle. They visited Fairview together a few months later. Jake showed her the house he grew up in, the cafe where he was once dumped, the mural of his story on the community center wall. Lena held his hand through it all. They even ran into Emily, briefly, at the local farmer's market. Emily was polite, congratulatory, but the look in her eyes said it all. She saw what she had lost. Not the success, but the man Jake had become because of it. Later that night, Lena whispered, "Do you ever regret anything?" Jake shook his head. "Everything led me here. Even the heartbreak. Even the silence. It all had to happen so I could find this moment. Find you. The quiet wedding. They didn't throw a huge wedding. Just a garden, 20 people, a dog running around stealing snacks, and 2 people who knew that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up again and again." Jake wore a navy blue suit. Lena walked barefoot through the grass. They read vows they wrote by hand. Jake said, "I built empires, chased dreams, and climbed mountains. But nothing feels more like home than your hand in mine." Lena said, "I don't want perfect. I want honest, patient, and present. And that's what you've given me." And that day, for the first time, Jake Carter, the man who lost, built, broke, rose, and inspired, finally found peace. Not because he finished his journey, but because he found someone who wanted to walk the rest of it with him. Epilogue. Years later, their daughter found a photo in the family album. It showed Jake and Lena sitting on a rooftop, watching the sunset over the city. "Daddy," she asked, "what's your biggest success?" Jake looked at Lena, then at his daughter, and with a smile he said, "Learning how to love again. That's when I finally won.